Chapter 20. The hangar was still patent. At least no aliens had managed to get in. After the two in the hallway, Powell's command override had admitted the trio through the lock without any other problems. The vast space of the hangar was quiet. It seemed empty. If there had been work crews inside when the alert sounded, they were not around now. "Which ship is the easiest to access?" Wilkes asked. "Which one is most likely to be fueled and spaceworthy?" "Over there," Powell said. He pointed. There might be other vessels elsewhere, but this particular hangar held 4 starhoppers, including the robot ship in which Wilkes, Billy, and Bueller had arrived. Wilkes was glad that the one Powell had indicated was not the American. He would prefer something with little more human comfort designed into it. Then again, any port in a storm was a pretty good philosophy, and between Spears and the aliens, this place wasn't just a storm, it was a hurricane. "All aboard," Wilkes said. He waved his carbine at the ship. The base was a wreck. Spears and his unit moved through the chaos, shooting whatever got in their way. Mostly the targets were people, but they did chop down a couple of the drones who were too slow on the uptake. What the hell, he thought. He was improving the gene pool. Attacking him was a non-survival characteristic, for certain. There were a few things to be salvaged here. He was going to have to cut his losses. True, he was going to win the battle and the war, pitiful and short as it was, but it would mean that the base itself was a loss. Well, a good commander knew when to dig in, or when to dump his tanks and leave the party. Third base had served its purpose. He would have liked a little more time, but then that was nearly always the case with commanders, wasn't it? You tried for perfect, but you accepted what you had to and moved on. When the battle was joined, you had to deal with what was, not what you wished it was. In a perfect galaxy, you'd always have the troops and the materiel you needed to wage the best battle plan. In this galaxy, it seldom happened. The unit had lost a couple more troopers, one to gunfire, another to a booby trap, but it was moving well. The vault where Spears had his best drone stored, the cream of the crop so far, would be impervious to anything short of a nuke, and only he had the key that would open the vault. Those being safe, the only other thing of value on this rock was the way off it, and he had that covered too. It would be a poor general indeed who didn't keep his line of retreat open. Spears was not a poor general. He led his troops towards the starship hangars. Billy was beyond fear by now. Her adrenaline surged no more than a trickle, just enough to keep her alert. It was odd to think you could get used to something like this, but it seemed to be happening. Or maybe she was finally losing her mind. She was too tired to care which it was. Next to her, Wilkes said, "Well?" He was talking to Powell, who frowned at the control unit he held. Powell tapped in a series of numbers on the small device, then looked at the ship the three of them stood in front of. "The hatch isn't opening," Powell said. "I can see that. Why not?" Powell shook his head. I don't know. This is the command override. It's supposed to open every lock on the base, right down to the beer coolers in the kitchen. It's the one Spears carries when he's here. It stays with whoever is the CO on the station. It's worked so far. It should work here." "Are you sure you've entered the correct code?" Billy said. "Yes, I'm sure." Wilkes sighed. "Spears. He's fucked us again. We should have guessed it. As paranoid as he is, he wouldn't trust anybody with the ships if he wasn't around. We'll have to run a bypass." "That'll take time," Powell said. "The access panel is armored." "I don't see that we have much of a choice," Wilkes said. Spears and his troops reached the outer hangar via the emergency escape tunnel he'd had built. The two transports in the huge room stood silent. He had half his platoon fan out and take up guard positions, but there was no need. They were alone. He almost felt sorry for the enemy, so outclassed. Powell never really had a chance. "Okay, the rest of you with me to the inner hangar." They moved down the interlink. "I think that's got it," Wilkes said. The access panel for the hatch control had to be burned open, but once it was done, the circuits were fairly easy to reroute. Wilkes bypassed the electronics entirely, shut off the power to the hatch, and used the manual crank to begin winding the hatch up. He had a 15-centimeter gap opened at the bottom when he heard a voice. "Freeze frame it!" Wilkes turned to look, saw half a dozen Marines in climate suits and full battle gear pointing their weapons at them. He spared a quick glance for Billy, and understanding passed between them. Better to go down shooting than be fed to the aliens. "Goodbye, Billy," Wilkes whispered. "Sorry." He leapt for his carbine where it leaned against the ship, saw Billy swing her weapon up to firing position. Wilkes waited for the impacts of the bullets that would kill him, knowing there was no way he could get to his own piece before the Marines cut him to pieces, but going to go out trying. Fuck it. A blinding white light smashed into Wilkes and took him away. Odd, he hadn't expected it to be like that. When Wilkes came to, he was lying on his back next to Powell, Billy sprawled on the other side of the Major. Wilkes blinked, not understanding. "Nice try, Sergeant," Spears said. Wilkes rolled onto his side, found himself facing Spears. Half a dozen troops backed him, each of them holding shock sticks, essentially riot batons wired to stun a victim into unconsciousness at a touch. "Concussion charges," Spears said, answering Wilkes' unspoken question. "Mounted in the locks of all the ships. You'd gotten that hatch up another 5 or 6 centimeters? They'd have gone off without me having to use this." He waved a small electronic device. Wilkes looked at Spears, his mind still fuzzy. There was something he was going to do. What? "No point in doing anything heroic, Sergeant," the general continued. "I'll just have you stunned. You don't get to die yet." Spears looked at Powell, who had yet to awaken. "I might have known that Dickless there wouldn't have the balls to try something like this on his own. Was that you in the crawler shooting at my decoy?" Wilkes managed a nod. Spears returned the gesture. "Thought so. You get credit for trying, but you picked the wrong side. Too bad. I admire a man with guts, even if he's an enemy." Billy moaned in her sleep. "Win some, lose some," Spears said. He turned away. "All right, men, you know the drill. Get the cargo loaded, collect your gear. Sort out the prisoners, and free the loyalists. I'll give you a list." "What are you going to do?" Wilkes said. His head hurt, and he felt as if he were going to vomit, but he maintained, taking slow and deep breaths. "Well, it doesn't really concern you anymore, now does it? But, because you gave me a decent fight, I'll tell you. I'm going home, to Earth. I'll be taking a small core of the aliens, and we'll have ourselves a little sortie. Once I demonstrate how effective my troops are, we'll get support to build a full-scale army of trained aliens. We're going to kick ass, son, and when I show the recordings of how we did it to the powers that be, we'll get what we need to win this war." Jesus, he really believed it. The guy was a few kilograms short of fission mass, crazy as a stepped-on roach. "What about us?" That from Powell, who had managed to sit up. "You and your allies are up for court-martial, Major. I don't have time to fool with such piddly shit now, so you'll stay here until I can send the appropriate legal teams back to handle it. You can't leave us here. There are aliens loose in the base. We'll be slaughtered, eaten. You should have thought of that before you played at sedition, Major. He turned away and moved off. Wilkes made as if to stand, but two of the troopers stepped towards him, stun wands held ready. Wilkes settled back. Jumping them would only get him another headache when he woke up in half an hour, if he woke up at all. Right now, it seemed a lot more important to stay awake. Whatever happened to them, he wanted to see it coming.